Disability Connection West Michigan wants to invite you to their 8th annual conference. It's being held on May 4th, that's a Friday, at Muskegon Community College in the Collegiate Hall. This year's conference is titled Employment and Hobbies, Get Into the Game of Life. You remember that old-fashioned game, right? Well, Toyota sure does. Their TV ads feature that game of life. Now you remember it, don't you? You know that every game has a beginning, and this one-day conference begins at 8:30 in the morning with a complimentary continental breakfast. Lunch will be provided later. Here's a sample of what you'll experience when you come. A cafe-style group discussion in the morning offers a unique opportunity to meet others in the community and share ideas about what we can do to make our community more inclusive for everyone. You'll also learn how you can connect with others to put those ideas into action. There will be a session that will have a panel of experts focusing on getting a job. Experts will explain what services are available through their agencies and share success stories about people they've worked with who now have jobs and are successfully employed. Have you ever wished that you knew what events, festivals, and celebrations were happening outside of your door? The director of the Muskegon County Convention and Visitors Bureau will showcase many of the exciting events that are happening in and around Muskegon. This breakout session will also showcase the Leisure and Recreation Club. They will encourage everyone to get out and enjoy the unique activities and show how accommodations can be made so that even more events are accessible to all. If a local trip isn't excitement enough for you, we have a breakout session that will allow you to take a trip down memory lane and save some of those treasured memories in a very creative way. Scrapbooking has become an art, and we have a session that will intrigue and excite you. If you prefer to get your exercise while staying at home, well, you would love our session describing the techniques and benefits of exercise. You'll learn to strengthen your body and stay healthy through expert instruction. Since we believe in addressing the whole person, we also are featuring experts from healthcare organizations who will be answering your questions about how to navigate that whole system. Their tips will be invaluable. Backed by popular demand, there will be a hands-on jewelry making session that will get your creative juices going. After lunch, there will be a fun session that will show you what not to do in an interview. The job coaches that are leading this session will have a ton of tips and tricks for finding, getting, and keeping a job that's right for you. The fun and information doesn't stop there. In the afternoon, there will be some fish stories being told. Members of the Michigan Anglers Association are going to explain how to find the fish, how to catch the fish, and maybe even how to tell a fish story or two. Tickets for this one-of-a-kind event are just $20, and that includes your lunch and the continental breakfast. Scholarship tickets are available for those who cannot afford to attend. Now you can get into the game of life. Jump in. Join us for the annual conference on Friday, May 4th at 8:30 in the morning. We're looking forward to seeing you.
It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Roanne Cheney. Her life is an example of getting into the game of life. She is a worthy competitor. She's knowledgeable, busy, independent. She loves Tiger baseball, reading historical novels, eating cheesy pasta, and traveling. Roanne enjoys not only playing, but winning in the game of life. There are lots of wins that Roanne has had. She is a graduate from Eastern Michigan University twice, first with a bachelor's degree and then her master's. She's appointed by the governor to chair the Advisory Commission on Long-Term Care Supports and Services from 2008 to 2011. Rowan is married. She is the Assistant Director for Michigan Disability Rights Coalition, and she's also our consultant with Disability Network Michigan and the liaison for long-term care NIFTY, nursing home facility transition work. So with that, please give a great West Michigan welcome to Rowan Cheney.
Thank you, Susan. And I have a little slideshow for you. It's mostly pictures, so you don't have to look at a lot of writing. And I'll try to describe the pictures because I know a lot of people have some visual disabilities. I started out with, when I was told the theme of this is the game of life, I chose cards, not the board game, but I chose cards. Because sometimes we're all dealt kind of a hand that we can't control, we can't change. Like acquiring or being born with our disabilities, we can't change that. We didn't really ask for it. It's something we got dealt. But this doesn't mean that we do not have many, many, many things in our lives that we can control. And ultimately win the card game that we're in here in the game of life. To win in your life, you need to constantly learn. That can be formal education, but I think there's far more. I have 6 years of education beyond high school, but that's not where I learned what I know today. It's not in college. Contributing, I think there's many ways to contribute. I think most of us want to be paid, have a paid job like we're all expected to do, but it's not the only way. And we need relationships. We need relationships for a lot of reasons, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And I think to win in the game of life, though, you need to have adventures, and you need to have fun. Lots of it, to really win. So I'm going to talk a little bit here. And I'm supposed to describe these slides. This is a slide in downtown Vilnius, Lithuania. Anybody know where that is? You do? The cameraman does.
The Baltic Sea.
Yes, on the Baltic Sea.
It's over by Russia.
That's right. They were a country that was dominated by the Soviet Union until 1989. And then they were given back their freedom. I got the opportunity, and so this is a picture of me being pushed in a wheelchair, and I learned in that trip I do not like using and having to be pushed in a manual wheelchair. You don't have anywhere near as much control as I need. And the other person in the middle of the picture is a woman named Yanina. And she was a person with a disability that lived in Vilnius. Vilnius is the capital of this country. At the time, I was living in Ann Arbor, Michigan, working for the Ann Arbor Center for Independent Living. We worked a lot with the rehab unit at the University of Michigan Hospital. And they had some cool doctors there. And one of the doctors had gotten into this exchange program with what formerly were the Eastern communist countries and their doctors. And the doctors were seeing that the Western world had a lot of technology and medicine that they wanted to learn about, including rehabilitation. So they started an exchange program, and the doctor from the University of Michigan kind of adopted, you ever heard the philosophy, nothing about us without us? Meaning, if you're going to talk about people with disabilities, you need to have people with disabilities there at the table in the discussions. So he told the doctors in Lithuania, he said, we are not going to have this exchange program unless you bring people with disabilities to Ann Arbor in the United States, and we will be bringing people with disabilities to your country. Because the people with disabilities are going to talk to each other. We're not just going to have this be a medical idea. So, because I had a relationship with that unit, and it's going to tie back all these themes I'm going to talk about are all interrelated. I was invited to go along on one of their trips. And like I said, this is one of the things I learned more than any of my college education. I learned about another language. I learned that in Lithuania there's no word for disability. They use the term invalidus, meaning invalid. The people the 2 or 3 people with disabilities that were on this trip talked a lot to the people with disabilities in Lithuania about that term, what it meant to them, how they might want to start using people first language, maybe even find another word. So they were doing that when we left. This was back in 1994. I learned about a different culture, and I learned about other forms of depression that were political in nature that people in this country have never experienced. People with disabilities in that country, when they were under Soviet domination, the purest communist viewpoint, not Marxist, but the communist state socialist view of Soviet Union was that you didn't want a society with people with disabilities. Because they were striving for a perfect society, and in a perfect society, you didn't have people with disabilities. It had its advantages because people with disabilities were largely ignored. They weren't killed, but they were ignored entirely. So the people with disabilities sort of formed their own culture. And they separated themselves a lot from the other culture, but out of that came some really creative ideas. So they didn't have any agency that would adapt their cars for them. But Yanina was the friend I met there. I don't know if you can see, you can't see details on that very well. And she had post-polio and she was paralyzed. She adapted her own car. This is a stick shift car. It's not an automatic. Stick shift, yes. And her legs were paralyzed. So, now I rode with her in Lithuania. I'm going to talk about risk-taking later. She, in order to shift this car, because it was a stick shift, she had to take her hands off the steering wheel. But she was amazing at being able to do that. So we drove around a pretty big city with her driving this adapted car that she learned how to do herself in conversations with other people. So they figured out how to do some of that. So people with disabilities, what I learned, can really survive and sometimes flourish in a pretty harsh environment. We also found another person who lived on a 3rd floor apartment who had literally made an elevator, a pull rope elevator off of his balcony to get out of. Now we met other people who were pretty much trapped in their apartments. But he was ingenious. He figured out a way. And a lot of us looked at it and said, we wouldn't go on that elevator, but he did. He got in and out of his apartment that way. So, I'm shifting gear here, contributing. Most people think that means having a paid job, and often it does. But I live in East Lansing, so I work a lot with the people in Lansing. And this was when the governor was signing legislation that she later rescinded. But this was a guy who was on the long-term care commission with me, and he was telling her a lot of stuff. I don't remember all the details, but he just wasn't there at the signing ceremony. He was telling her a lot of things. So you can see she's engaged. She's like listening to him. A lot of us just said, wow, this is, he just took the opportunity. Hey, how many times am I going to get to see the governor? I'm going to tell her what I think. So he did. That's a way to contribute. You can contribute if politics isn't your game. You can contribute artistically. And I'm starting to reach an age, I worked for a lot of years in my life, and I'm starting to reach an age where I'm starting to at least think about retirement, thinking about cutting back, working full time. So I'm thinking, well, what do I do? I've done all this advocacy work, I've done all this policy work, and I might like to develop some of my artistic skills. I've always wanted to be an artist and never thought I had much skills, but I'm finding out and learning that you can acquire them. So I might think about that. So you can contribute with art, by making jewelry, by scrapbooking, by volunteering for recycling. You know, there's a million things. Answering phones. You know, helping people file. There. You know, there's a lot of ways to volunteer. My husband always tells his son, he said, you really need to find something you like to do and get people to pay you for it. And I always thought that's really good advice, because that means you're going to find a job you enjoy. But I also think, well, you know, sometimes you just got to work. You just got to have an income. And you may not always like your work, or everybody who has a job has something in their job they don't like to do. It's not a pleasant activity. And I always tell people, well, you got to think creatively. Think how you can make that activity you really don't like to do more fun. And in my agency, every year around the holidays, we send out fundraising letters. And we have found that putting personal notes on those fundraising letters is a very effective way of getting more funds, because people think that, you know, it is targeted to them. But when you're signing 1,000 letters, that's a chore to do. and writing personal notes. So what we do in our office is try to schedule a lunch and a session afterwards where we all get together and do this, pass the piles of letters down to each other, where we can sit there and talk and find out about what else is going on in everybody else's life while we sign and write the personal notes to people in the letters. So that's a way of making it more fun. And I'm sure there's other things you could think of in jobs that are maybe a little boring to you or just not all that fun. So that's what I recommend.